Chapter 5, the emboldened for Chapter 5. Did Mr. Hood go over any of these with you? Actually, it's Chapter 6, isn't it? By the way, COVID brain is a real thing, too. I don't know if I want to say this on I twice, and I know I'm getting older and all that. I'm swimming in a really shallow gene pool where memory is concerned, but I twice went to Teams to type up a quiz, only to have Teams tell me I'd already done it. And I had. I was like, oh, this is the exact same quiz. I have no memory of it. There's like whole parts of the last 2 weeks that are just deleted from my brain. So it's real. Did you experience that? That makes me feel much better because you're not 59. So it makes me feel a whole lot better. So if I do crazy things, like, okay, crazier than normal things, or if I forget something, just be kind. Don't say, I told you that. That does not help someone who has memory. Just be patient with me. So did you discuss these emboldened questions at all with Mr. Hood or any of your whether your subs were? Okay, so you've discussed those. You feel good about those? Anybody want to say no? Let's talk about them. Okay, so what about the equip questions? Okay, great, excellent. Glad to see that. So you need to make sure, this is really important for this chapter. You have to know the difference between macroevolution and microevolution. Because macroevolution has never been observed, cannot be proven. Microevolution has been observed and has been proven. Macroevolution is the belief that everything came from a single-celled amoeba, and everything that's ever lived is the result of that single-celled amoeba that arose spontaneously from non-living chemicals. So a living thing from non-living chemicals. So macroevolution is talking about different species. So that a lizard turns into a bird, turns into, a monkey turns into a man. That's an oversimplification, but that's macroevolution. Microevolution is changes within a species. So they talk about Darwin's finches, and Darwin noticed with his finches, the little birds, that when it was dry and there weren't as many seeds, or the seeds were harder to open, their beaks grew slightly longer to make it possible for them to open those seeds and eat them. And when it was wet and there were more abundant seeds, their beaks grew a little bit shorter. Those cyclical changes within a species. That has been observed. That is true. But the finch never became a monkey. The finch never became anything but a finch. So they're two separate things that are unrelated to microevolution and macroevolution. So I just sort of answered the first one. So define macroevolution. I'll give you the definition I wrote down here, and you can add to your definition or not, however you would like. The belief that all life emanates or comes from a first life, a single-cell amoeba, that occurred randomly, by chance, in a completely blind process of non-intelligent origin from non-living chemicals. So God, nor any other intelligent force, whether that's aliens or something else, was not involved. Now, there's such a thing as theistic evolution. We're not going to talk about that, really. There is such a thing that God sparked the process and evolution took it from there. But this is macroevolution. Is when you say macroevolution, this is what you generally mean. Why is Darwin's usage of natural selection a misnomer, meaning that it's a mischaracterization of the situation? Yeah.
There's also think about it about intelligence. Yeah, it's
Right. If we play the keys or quiz and I tell you that you can pick teams, right? Is that a blind process? No. If I say, okay, Jake, Elijah, you're the captains. There's no blind process there, right? They're selected. So there can be no selection in a blind, unintelligent process. Who does the selecting? So yeah, you can't accidentally end up with teams. Explain why microevolution cannot be used as evidence for macroevolution. We just talked about what micro and macro are. Why isn't because Darwinists will say that microevolution is evidence for macroevolution. Why is that not true, Davis?
like
Right, right. Microevolution is an adaptation or adaptations in a species or in living matter that helps it survive. But no living organism has ever been observed to evolve into another kind of organism. The two things are completely separate. And they're saying it leads to macroevolution, but there's literally, absolutely no evidence of that anywhere, scientifically. Okay, so these next things are asking you about all of those different things that they wrote about how this is all the different proofs against evolution that they gave having to do with different species. So the first thing is genetic limitations. So how is genetic limitation proof against natural selection? First of all, let's talk about what genetic limitation is. Yeah, yeah. So genetic limitations is that species seem to have built into them a limitation that they can change this much but no farther. And so the genetic limitations will not allow for one species to turn into another. And no matter how scientists have tried, and they have tried, they can't um, uh, they can't notate one type of living thing, or excuse me, they can't mutate one type of living thing into a different species. It talked about fruit flies and why they're studied because their life cycle is so short, you can see so many life cycles. And there will be changes within the fruit fly. But they didn't even become a different kind of fly, let alone a different species. And then how is cyclical change proof against natural selection? Davis? Yeah, yeah. So change within a species does not move forward toward a new species, but it goes back and forth within a limited range, like finches, like Darwin's finches. Longer beaks, shorter beaks, longer beaks, shorter beaks, longer beaks, shorter beaks, but not a completely new appendage on the face to be a different animal. So I think this is an important quote. I think you'll see this quote again sometime when you're getting quizzed. Natural selection can explain the survival of a species, but not the arrival of a species. Natural selection can explain why some finches survived a drought and others didn't because their beaks grew longer. But and so they survived, but they can't, it can't bring about the existence of a new species. Does that make sense? So natural selection can explain the survival of a species, but not the How is irreducible complexity proof against natural selection? Now, let's first talk about irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity is any item that cannot be reduced and still be functional. And it talks about in your book a car motor. And I always think of The Sound of Music. I don't know if any of you love The Sound of Music. I love The Sound of Music. When the Von Trapp family is trying to escape, the police are chasing them. Why are you laughing at me?
Oh, the movie.
Oh, yeah. What did you think the sound? Like, oh, you literal Sound of Music. Oh, that's so funny. It's such an old movie. You guys don't even know the movie. That's funny. So think about the Sound of Music. Think about the movie, The Sound of Music. Is everyone with me now? Yeah. And the Von Trapp family's trying to escape, and they're in the convent, and they're able to get away because these two nuns have taken parts off of the cars. And they go up to the Mother Superior and say, Mother Superior, we have sinned, and show them this, and they can't start their cars. Their engine won't work because if you take any part off of it, it ceases to run, to work. And each cell in every living thing is irreducibly complex. If you take any little, and the cell is microscopic. If you take any little part out of it, it ceases to work. It no longer can survive. So irreducible complexity means that macroevolution can't proceed. Because as soon as you make a change to a cell, it's done. It doesn't work. It's useless. So irreducible complexity in any interconnected system cannot function when any one component is taken away. It can no longer function. Cells, every cell in every living thing is irreducibly complex. That means that any sort of intermediate form would be non-functional. It couldn't survive because it would be non-functional. To me, these are all convincing, but this may be the most important one. It literally can't happen because they wouldn't survive. They wouldn't be a living thing. How is non-viability of transitional forms proof against natural selection? This is related, but not exactly the same thing. What does non-viability of transitional forms mean? Right. They talked about if I can't remember if it's birds became reptiles or reptiles became birds. I think it's reptiles became birds. And what do you do with a half reptile, half bird? That animal with natural selection, the fittest to survive, that would not be a fit animal. Couldn't fly, couldn't run. How would they get food? So those transitional forms, which have never been found in the fossil record, that's the next thing we're going to read about. Wouldn't be viable. They wouldn't survive. So in order for Darwinism to be true, living things must be viable while transitioning from one species to another. And such an animal would be unlikely to survive even if it could function, which it can't, because every cell is irreducibly complex. And then finally, how is molecular isolation proof against natural selection? That's my fault. I didn't turn it on. Quite possibly. Actually, I don't have strong COVID, but I probably will test positive. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's it. That we have the same DNA. We have the same genetic code in every living thing. So the molecular isolation could be just as likely due to a common creator as a common ancestor. Everything that is alive on the planet Earth has to be amenable, has to work in this biosphere. So there are similarities among living things because God created us to live in this biosphere on another planet, to live on Jupiter. Any questions on any of these? Okay, if you would please open up your books to page 151. What about the fossil record? It's right in the middle of page 151. I'm just going to read a few pages to you. I've missed reading aloud to you. And my daughter and my husband don't like it as much, so follow along with me, please. What about the fossil record? So let's quickly review what we've seen so far. These are the 5 lines of evidence which show that natural selection could not have produced new life forms. Genetic limits, cyclical change, irreducible complexity, non-viability of transitional forms, and molecular isolation. But doesn't the fossil record support the Darwinian theory? Let's take a look. Without benefit of today's technology, Charles Darwin could not recognize the problems his theory faced at the cellular level. However, he did recognize that the fossil record was a big problem for his theory because it didn't show gradualism. That's why he wrote, why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. And this perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. But Darwin thought that further fossil discoveries would reveal that his theory was true. Time has proven him wrong. Contrary to what you may hear in the general media, the fossil record has turned out to be a complete embarrassment for Darwinists. If Darwinism were true, we would have found thousands, if not millions, of transitional fossils by now. Instead, according to the late Harvard paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould, an evolutionist, the history of most fossil species includes 2 features particularly inconsistent with gradualism, with evolution. 1, stasis, meaning that things stay the same. Most species exhibit no directional change during their tenure on Earth. They appear in the fossil record looking much the same as when they disappear. Morphological change, so morphologically morph from one thing into another, is usually limited and directionless. 2, sudden appearance. In any local area, a species does not arise gradually by the steady transformation of its ancestors. It appears all at once and fully formed. Like maybe Genesis 2? In other words, Gould is admitting that fossil types appear suddenly fully formed and remain the same until extinction without any directional change. Exactly what one would expect to find if creation were true. But instead of adopting creationism, Gould rejected the gradualism of Darwinism and formulated a theory called punctuated equilibria, or PE. PE suggests that species evolved faster over a shorter period of time, thereby explaining the huge fossil gaps. Gould had no natural mechanism by which this could have occurred, but since he was an atheist, he had to explain the fossil record somehow. This is a classic case of allowing your prejudices to taint your observations. But we digress. The main point here is that the fossil record actually lines up better with supernatural creation than with macroevolution. Indeed, there aren't missing links. There's a missing chain. There is no chain because nearly all of the major groups of animals known to exist appear in the fossil record abruptly and fully formed in strata from the Cambrian period, which many scientists estimate to have occurred between 600 and 500 million years ago. Jonathan Wells writes, the fossil evidence is so strong and the events so dramatic that it had to come become known as the Cambrian explosion, or biology's Big Bang. This evidence, of course, is completely inconsistent with Darwinism. All animal groups appeared separately, fully formed, and at the same time. That's not evidence of gradual evolution, but of instantaneous creation. So the Darwinian tree we are so used to seeing doesn't properly illustrate the real fossil record. In fact, as Wells observes, if any botanical analogy were appropriate, it would be a lawn rather than a tree. And that lawn would have patches of different grasses or different plants separated by large areas of nothing but dirt. At this point, you may be thinking, but what about the skull progression we're used to seeing? Doesn't it appear that man has evolved from apes? A number of years ago, I, Norm, debated a Darwinist who lined up skulls on a table to illustrate that evolution had occurred. Ladies and gentlemen, right here is the evidence for evolution, he declared. Gee, how can you ignore the fossils? The skulls look like they're in a progression. They look as if they could be ancestrally related. Is this good evidence for Darwinism? No, it's not. It's not any better than the evidence that a large kettle evolved from a teaspoon. The problem for the Darwinists is that the fossil record cannot establish ancestral relationships. Why not? Because according to Michael Denton, 99% of the biology of any organism resides in its soft anatomy, which is inaccessible in a fossil. In other words, it's extremely difficult to discover the biological makeup of a creature by looking at its fossil remains. Jonathan Wells observes the fossil evidence is open to many interpretations because individual specimens can be reconstructed in a variety of ways, and because the fossil record cannot establish ancestral descendant relationships. But this doesn't stop the Darwinists. Since Darwinism has to be true because of their prior philosophical commitment, Darwinists have to find evidence supporting it. So instead of admitting that fossils can't establish ancestral relationships, Darwinists take the 1% that fossils tell them and then use the other 99% of leeway to depict their fossil discoveries as filling in any gap they want. With such vast leeway and no facts to constrain them, Darwinists have been free to creatively build entire missing links from fossil remains as trivial as a single tooth. This is why many so-called missing links have later been exposed as frauds or mistakes. Henry Gee, chief science writer for Nature, writes, "To take a line of fossils and claim that they represent lineage is not a scientific hypothesis that can be tested, but an assertion that carries the same validity as a bedtime story. Amusing, perhaps even instructive, but not scientific." Not only is the fossil record inadequate to establish ancestral relationships, in light of what we now know about the irreducibly complex nature of biological systems, the fossil record is irrelevant to the question. The similarity of structure or anatomy between types, sometimes called homology, also tells nothing about common ancestry. Michael Behe writes, "Anatomy is, quite simply, irrelevant to the question of whether evolution could take place on the molecular level." So is the fossil record. It no longer matters whether there are huge gaps in the fossil record or whether the record is as continuous as that of US presidents. And if there are gaps, it does not matter whether they can be explained plausibly. The fossil record has nothing to tell us about whether the interactions of 11 CTS retinal with I don't even know how to say that, rhodopsin, transducin, and phosphorysterase, whatever, irreducibly complex systems could have developed step by step. If you would please on your own read up to on page 55 is intelligent design and intelligent alternative. And that's it for today.
You're welcome.